for where a will is involved. Now, this is extremely unfortunate that the translator uses the word will. I think almost every major translation in verse 16 says will. But it's the same Greek word that we saw earlier. It's diatheke, which we saw up here earlier in verse 15. And the writer to the book of Hebrews uses the same Greek word diatheke throughout his letter because he understands that this is covenant. The Hebrew equivalent is the word brit. So he's not talking about a will or a last will and testament. But in the Hebrew mind, the word brit, which answers to the Greek word diatheke, is the concept of the cutting of animals with the shedding of blood, which is representative of the death that must be shown if a party fails to keep their covenant arrangement. So blood represents death, which represents a violation of a covenant. In other words, the blood represents the payment. The blood equals atonement, to put it in plain language. He says in verse 16, for where a covenant is involved, the death of the one who made it must be represented by him taking on the agreement to die if he himself breaks the agreement. It doesn't mean he needs to die. It just means he needs to agree to die if he breaks it. So a symbolic death must take place on his part, which answers to the physical death of the animals themselves. That's verse 16. And the word death there, thanaton, is actually in the singular. This is going to become very important in the Greek. It's a singular death. For where a will is involved, the death singular of the one singular who made it must be established. But when we get to verse 17, he says, for a covenant, not a will, for a covenant takes effect only at death. The word death here is not the same as used above. In verse 16, it's the word thanaton, and it's a singular word, death. But in verse 17, it's the word nekrois, which is not only a different word altogether, it's an adjective, whereas up above it's a noun. But in verse 17, diatheke gar epi nekrois, it's a adjective, and it's a plural adjective, right? It's an adjective in the plural, meaning for where a will takes effect only at deaths, plural. Now, deaths of what or whom?